Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Anthony Mead, and I'm the director of the Morlan Gallery here at Transylvania University. And with that, it is my great pleasure to be able to welcome our guest tonight, Marilee Salvator. Before I get to introductions, if this is your first time joining us, welcome. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of housekeeping so that you can most easily navigate our talk tonight. Down at the bottom of this window, you will find two important buttons. One of them is for closed captioning. If you'd like to take advantage of live closed captioning, you can go ahead and press the little CC live transcript button, and that will enable closed captioning. Also down there, you will find a button for Q&A. That's for our question and answer session. We will do a Q&A session that'll be about 10 to 15 minutes long at the end of tonight's talk, but you can feel free to type in your questions at any time. And when we get to that question and answer session, I will read your questions to Marilee. Also, as a quick note on the weather, chances are that you are almost all, if not all of us, are coming in from Kentucky tonight, which means that you are well aware that there's a big storm coming through and that we have high winds and flooding and lots of rain. So if for some reason either Marilee or our wonderful marketing communications director who operates all the behind the scenes things for our webinars, Julie Martinez, or myself, if any of us lose power or internet, we're sorry, and that will conclude tonight's programming. Hopefully that doesn't happen though. So Marilee Salvator joins us tonight from Bowling Green, Kentucky, where she is an associate professor of printmaking and design at Western Kentucky University. Her work has been exhibited across North America and internationally in South Korea, China, Japan, Portugal, Serbia, Ireland, Scotland, Italy, New Zealand, and Romania. Salvator received her BFA from Illinois State University and her Master's of Fine Arts in Printmaking from the University of New Mexico. And yesterday, just on a local point, our students at Transy had the real joy and privilege to work with Marilee to create a 16-foot long mural of prints that were all created by the students in the printmaking and community engagement through the arts class, which I find to be kind of one pillar of Marilee's work, which is really based on a kind of inclusive education and collaboration that I think is really beautiful. Salvator's work includes both large-scale immersive installations and unique prints that include 2D elements that come from intaglio, screen printing, linoleum printing, collage, and collage. Standing in the current exhibition Flux that is in Morlan Gallery right now, Salvator's colorful and sculptural print installation seems to grow and take over the space. It wraps around corners and jumps to other walls in an organic manner. And I feel like it really asks us questions about our long and complicated relationship with microorganisms, as well as our broader habitat. And with that, I will turn it over to Marilee. Everyone, please join me in welcoming Marilee Salvator.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Anthony. I'm super excited to be here. I also want to thank, in addition to Anthony, Kurt and Cremina for working with me, as well as their students on the wonderful installation that we did yesterday. That was super exciting and fun and was a great opportunity, I think, for all of us to work together. So I want to talk to you about my work. I'm an artist who prefers to work with an installation. However, due to the massive amount of time that each installation takes me, I tend to alternate back and forth between more traditional two-dimensional works and larger immersive print environments. My lecture will discuss both approaches of working. Guess it would be good if I start the slideshow. The overall themes I deal with in my work are growth. Oh, wait, you can see it, right? Did I share? No. Sorry, I jumped ahead. Okay, now you can see my screen. All right.
Yep, now you're good.
Okay. The overall themes I deal with in my work are growth, expansion, accumulation, multiplication, repetition, mutation, reproduction, invasion, beauty, and destruction. This first image here is a print by John Cage. Most people know Cage as a musical composer. However, he created a number of beautiful prints at Crown Point Press in San Francisco. Cage believed in putting emphasis on his actions of his process. He would use chance operations to decide how to organize his compositions. He had a collection of 15 rocks that he would use. The chance operations would determine the rock's placement on his matrix, and then he would trace them. Cage thought that by using such methods, he could leave out his personality. He said chance by helping to avoid habitual modes of thinking could produce something fresher and more vital than that which the composer might invent alone. He believed that intention was always ruled by one's own taste and personality, whereas non-intention moved beyond like and dislike and became something more resembling of an act of nature. He said, "My favorite music is the music I have yet to hear. I do not hear the music I write in order to hear the music that I haven't heard." And so this image here goes back quite a ways. I made this in graduate school, and I continue to show this in my slide lectures because it was a very pivotal piece for me, and I still feel that it's very relevant. After I received my undergraduate degree, I moved to New Mexico, and that was a drastic shift in the climate, considering that I grew up in the Midwest. After living there for several months, one day it rained, and I happened to look out the window, and there were a number of my neighbors outside standing in the rain, letting it land on them. And I'm like, well, geez, that's very strange. And then all of a sudden it occurred to me, how sacred the rain was there. We were in the desert. Obviously that was really important. So I knew right away that the next body of work that I would create would be based on the rain. So I started going outside when it would rain, and I would put out a piece of paper and let the rain touch the surface of the paper, and then I would trace it. I did this for probably 6 months. I recruited my peers because it didn't rain often. So I would get a big group of people together, and we'd all go out with our paper and let the rain hit the surface. And so I could gather these. That was sort of probably my first collaboration with other artists, and I didn't really realize it at the time that that's what I was doing. So this ended up to being the larger piece that I created. I wanted the piece to have this larger immersive experience if you stood in front of it. And then I also displayed it with gloves so you could have these individual experiences with the sheets of paper. All of the paper was sewn together, and there was approximately 3 layers in each little section that you see. I left the strands of thread hanging because I wanted to really talk about fragility, both how fragile nature is, as well as the human experience. And any of them can equally unravel at any time. This is an image by Yayoi Kusama. I admire Kusama's highly obsessive and prolific working methods. She is known for filling rooms, walls, ceilings, sometimes even people, with her organic spreading forms. She describes the work as being without beginning, end or center, and having it feel like it can expand indefinitely. This is certainly something that I would like for my work to also have. Tara Donovan is another artist that I find highly inspirational. I love how her work tends to grow and take over a space in an organic manner. Donovan was quoted as saying, "It's not like I'm trying to simulate nature. It's more of mimicking of the way of nature, the way things actually grow." She wants her work to feel like a field of material that can expand indefinitely. She sees her materials as building blocks or modules. She sees the work as a conversation between herself and those modules. She doesn't start with the design, but with the objects, and works in a very intuitive way, allowing the work to grow and take on a form organically. Her installations grow through repetitive labor. And I feel like my work also does this. I'm also highly interested in biology. A large amount of my research is related to cellular structures. I'm fascinated by disease and cancer due to the contradictions that these cells hold. If you're not familiar with them, you could look at them and think that they're beautiful. They have an intriguing composition, interesting patterns. But if you're a scientist or a medical specialist, then you know that they're the sign of your immune system gone amok. These images are of mesothelioma. About 5 years ago, my father was diagnosed with this cancer. I had been working with cancer prior to that. So immediately, whenever I was told the type of cancer, I went and Googled it to see what it looked like. I was pretty amazed at how beautiful it was. It looks kind of like a watercolor, beautiful washes. Yet at the same time, this was invading my father's body. So that was a really hard thing to kind of navigate. 3 years later, he died. It had metastasized through his body. I'm interested in how cancer grows and multiplies, as well as its ability to metastasize from one part of the body to another. I view my work similarly. Shapes and forms break off from one part of the composition and reform and grow into a different part in an invasive way, especially in my installations. My work is quite intuitive. I frequently use chance operations to remove critical thought process from my printing process. This is a list of rules created by Coretta Kent. Coretta was one of John Cage's teachers at Emmanuel Hart College. These are her list of rules for art making. And number 8 is one that I try very hard to follow. I'm not always successful, but I certainly try. Do not try to create and analyze at the same time. They're very different processes. One of the main reasons I choose to work within the print medium is because of its ability to create multiples or modules that can be combined in countless different ways. I have been creating shaped etching plates for a number of years. I have over 100 of these plates, and they range in size from 1 inch by 1 inch to 28 by 20 inches, which just so happens to be the size of the acid bath. Most of these are meticulously hand-rendered, and all are inspired by nature and biology. Each plate is either etched into its shape or hand-cut. Additionally, I have a growing database of shaped relief blocks and digital files that I incorporate in my work. I use these modules in different ways to create new works. Sometimes they are printed on various papers, hand-cut and collated into a composition. Other times they are simply layered through an assembly-like printing session. The work goes through many printing sessions. Sometimes I build a surface up over several months, and other times they develop quickly and are deemed finished after a single studio session. I work on many pieces at a time at varying degrees of completeness. After printing, the work will go into a pile for viewing. It's there that I make my critical decisions. Sometimes the decision is to put it back into the printing rotation. Sometimes it's to call it complete, and then other times it's to either cut it up or throw it away because I've overdone it. These types of procedures permit me to remove my critical thought process from making, allowing room for chance to enter my process. So I will have, when I'm working this way, I will have prints at different stages in the mix. So I'll pull out a bunch of different pieces of paper, maybe like 10 for a printing day. Some will just have a background, some will have, partial completion, some might be close, because I like to have a lot of different things to work on at once. And then it just goes through this printing rotation process. Here's a few more of these. When I print the backgrounds, I'll print large quantities of them. So some of these I might pull out 2 years later, and it's a background I made that long ago. So I really like to mix it up like that. So different things at different periods of time. I look towards nature for inspiration. Invasive species of plants provide significant interest. I am intrigued by the way that these plants grow and overtake their environment. Kudzu is a great example. To the average person, well, probably the average person that doesn't live in the South, it's lush and quite beautiful, yet it's highly destructive. It's a plant that is native to Asia, and it was brought to the US in the 1800s, and currently it's covering about 7 million acres in the Southeast. Since it's outside its natural origin, it has no known predators. There's no diseases or insect pests to keep it regulated. And it suffocates everything that comes within its path by blocking the sun. And it's also able to grow a foot a day. I'm inspired by how plants like this can grow and travel, and I see their prolific growth as being very similar to how my installations might unfold in a gallery space. This is a work by Polly Applebaum. I was exposed to her work pretty early on as an artist, probably as an undergrad. And it wasn't until recently that I was looking at her work for a project. I was going to show images to my students that it was like, oh my gosh, this work is so inspirational to you. And I hadn't even realized how it was creeping in there. I just love how her work grows and creeps and takes over this gallery floor. So this is a piece called Propagation. And this was the largest version of this piece. So it's 125 feet in length. Here is my favorite version of the piece in a much smaller space, but the work was really able to grow and creep across this space in a unique way. So this is a piece that it took me about 3 years to create with the help of 2 people assisting me pretty regularly. And it includes over 25 different relief blocks. And what I would do is I just created these like 24 by 36 blocks of linoleum with a pattern on there. And then this includes several thousand of these prints on this vinyl type film. I wanted the work to feel like it was going to crawl and creep into your space and that it was a highly invasive piece. And I also wanted to really play around with layering of translucent films. The most important image making process that I use is layering. Layering allows the work to slowly reveal itself to the viewer. I admire the beauty of transparency and rich textural surface I can create through layering of different matrices, transparent inks, and various printing substrates. So I wanted it to creep and crawl onto the floor, and this being such a small gallery space, it really felt like it was going to continue to invade your space. Each time I install one of these installations, it's a completely different experience. This piece being so large and so many layers of material, it's one that I have only installed myself, and it takes about a week for me to get it all installed. But each time I install it in a different space, and this applies to all the different installations, I like to go there and really respond to the space and listen to the work and see how it would like to grow. And I really want it to kind of inform me and grow across the space. So for this particular piece, I thought of each pattern and color as a different species. And so I would work one by one and allow it to kind of just sort of grow and spread on its own and see how it would unfold. And it's actually one of my favorite things to do, is to go into a space and arrange the pieces, because I always learn something new about the work and what it wants to do. And I think that that's a very important aspect of it. In this particular version, I allowed it to start kind of buckling from the wall. I wanted it to feel more sculptural. It's a thing that I'm always trying to achieve. Having been taught as a two-dimensional artist, I don't really have the confidence to be extremely sculptural, but I'm always pushing for that each time, very, very small pushes. But I was excited about this one because it really felt like it was breathing and that it was alive in this space by having these pieces poke out of the wall. Okay, so this is a piece called Growth Patterns, and part of this is installed in the gallery there. And this was the first version of it, and it was a lot smaller. This is a really long-term project. I started it, I don't know, it's about like a 10-year process. It's quite long. Originally, I had about 500 pieces in it. And I showed it like that for about 2 years, and then I put it away, and then I came back to it later. But again, I'm really interested in these images, these installations that are going to sort of grow organically and spread and kind of have that illusion of it being able to continue to grow into your space and take over and be an invasive. So this one, I had it crawl on the floor a little bit. There's been some versions where I also had it crawl onto the ceiling a little bit and kind of creep in the space that way. So here's a smaller detail. Originally, these pieces were all kind of cut into the shape that the plates were. So I have all those shaped etching plates. And I decided, well, let's make an installation with them. So I started printing them on paper, and then I would mount it to wood, and then I would cut it with my scroll saw. So originally I was cutting them about the way I created them. And then I was like, well, why don't you use your saw as another drawing tool, and then get crazy with your cutting and really play around with cutting into them, started cutting these things like this, holes in them, and also just making them into different shapes. So I could really explore different ways of creating different pieces. I wanted, when I came back to the piece, so it was put away for a few years, and then it was, someone wanted to show it in a show, and when I attended the reception, I was so excited. So I let the curators install it how they wanted to. That first time that I did that, they pretty much reproduced the piece exactly as it was. And really, I was interested in seeing how can someone else take these pieces and make it into a bit of a different piece. And I'll show some examples of that in a second. But what I really wanted to explore in the creation of the piece at that point in time was I wanted to make it a lot larger, but I also wanted to make it more sculptural. So I started stacking the pieces on top of each other. And then I started experimenting with layering different thicknesses of wood as well. So some really thin pieces versus thicker pieces. So this was the first version of the larger piece, and this one ended up being, 70 feet wide. And there's over 1,100 pieces, not in counting the pieces that stack on the top. So here's a couple pictures of this installation. And then when I went to this space in Nebraska, I was like, okay, why don't I play around with making the piece super compact? Because before that, it was all about that creeping, crawling into your space. Well, what happens if it becomes this compact image? And this is what ended up happening with that. And I really love how this piece turned out. And it actually has become my favorite version of the piece. There's some other views of it. So this one seems to be more about this larger organism that's created by these other types of microbes inside of it. And the relationship between each piece. So from there, the first time that I let people kind of do what they wanted with the piece was accidental. I had went to this gallery space and we were going to install it, and they told me that their walls were carpet. So I drove down there, and then we went to begin hanging the piece, and we tried to hang one piece and it wouldn't stick. So this was the large version, so like probably 1,000 pieces at that point. And so all of a sudden we had to pivot and then drill holes in the back of every single piece so we could hang them with nails. And we only had like 2 days to install the work. So that was kind of stressful. And luckily it was a friend of mine that was the gallery director there. So he was all for making it happen. And then he got a bunch of students at the last minute to help us, because there's no way we're going to be able to install it all by ourselves in the time that we had left after we did that. And so I had to just let them go and install alongside me. And so I made up some just real general rules that are formal, like don't put light colors together, don't put the same shape together, that type of thing. And then we just went for it. And something happened that was really amazing was they had, their own ideas of how it should be hung. And they had thought of things that I hadn't thought of, because I was inside of my head and hadn't really, I thought that I was being very experimental, but I find that we often think we're being more so than maybe we are, because we have these sort of preconceived notions about things that we don't know that we have until someone challenges them. So that was really exciting, and it really opened up a lot of options. So after that point, I started having curators install the piece as they would like, other than they had to, follow my basic rules. So this is a version. It was in a traveling show, and so I went to several different locations. So this curator of the show really got to play, because each time she did it totally different, and I loved that. So I was really interested in how she had these little pieces metastasizing into different places in this version. And then how in this version, this was in California, is creeping up the wall with the small broken pieces. And there's a bunch more that you could see on my website as well. I started working at WKU about 6.5 years ago, 7 years ago, actually. And when I started working there, one of my colleagues, Christina Arnold, when I saw her work, I was like, okay, we really need to collaborate. And I hadn't really collaborated with any other artists other than the rain thing prior to that. And she hadn't either. But both of our works, had very similar mark making structures and this sort of highly obsessive working process, and were inspired by biology. So we really decided we had to work together. And so here's one of the first pieces that we created as a group. And normally we would start with some sort of print element. I would print on the paper and then I'd hand it off to her. Christina is an installation artist and a glass blower. And she does a lot of sewing in her work as well. So she brought in some of those elements. You can see that there's some cyanotypes in there. And so she cast these neurons in glass and they would make cyanotypes of those. So she was incorporating those. And then she was using sewing as a drawing tool quite frequently. So she would sew together collage elements that I would give her that are printed and then add all these different things. And we would go back and forth between the two of us. And again, that thing happened where we both thought that we're extremely experimental and open to a lot of different things in our work. And we were put together, we would each do something that the other one would be like, oh, you can't do that. What are you doing? Well, that's just something you do. For like one for me that I didn't have any clue about was she would always sew these pieces of paper on, like this one has this paper on the edge, that last one, sections off of it, and like it has to be a rectangle, which I didn't even realize that I had that odd notion in my mind that if I was working on a piece of paper like this, it had to be a rectangle. And then there would be different things, that I would do that she would have that same response to. Luckily, we're both super open-minded, and when the other one would be like, what? Like, why is that? Why do you have a hang up about that? And we'd be like, well, yeah, I have no clue why I have a hang up about that. It's silly. So it really helped inform our own work and make us more open, working together as well as on our own. Working with someone else, collaborating with someone else, I think is a wonderful way for you to do that and step outside of your comfort zone and not even the areas that you don't even realize are your comfort zone. So layers and marks simultaneously create both addition and subtraction. Through a process of continuously reworking an image, elements combine, images emerge, they're removed, and eventually they stabilize. We reference botanical and human biology, the duality of growth as both generative and destructive. These were some panels. We started working on panels and I had a bunch of prints to collage into the work, and she brought drawings to collage in, and then we went back and forth and would draw on them in the studio. I see these as having, especially at the time, they had a lot more freedom, I felt like, than the things that I was doing alone. And also Christina really loves to use color. And I tend to be a little bit more reserved in my use of color. Often colors that are represented in nature, especially like desert sorts of climates. And then Christina would have super bright colors. So that was really great for me because it helped me, kind of think about color in a different way and not be as scared of it. So I started doing these large scale prints. I wanted to print something that was as large as the press bed. Often when I'm doing these works on paper, the background has some sort of digital image that I print first, and then I layer the different things on the top. For this size scale, I didn't have the ability to do that. So I really explored using some monotypes as a way to get an image for the back. and layering the shaped etching plates. And I suddenly decided what would happen if I start using some geometric heart edge shapes in contrast to that. I'm always trying to figure out ways to make me uncomfortable in my work, because I feel like if we're always comfortable in our work, it doesn't grow. And that's something that's extremely important to me, is that I'm not just standing still in making. So that was kind of a way to force me to think outside of that comfort zone, and also exploring brighter colors as well. So the hard edge shapes were pretty formal in nature, adding them to the pieces. I started really playing around with, I've always had this tendency to want to try to print things as transparent as possible that will show up. What is the lightest I can print something? So I really started playing around with that, and playing with how a super transparent circle would absorb into the paper. And then if I layered another one on top, this just sort of playing with levels of opacity and transparency as well. And so this one has probably 100 different circles that I would print. And I like to print these individually, the circles individually through screen printing. Okay, so I really wanted to explore using Petri dishes. I need to move quicker too, because we're running out of time here. So it seemed like a natural thing for me to explore, since my explorations in disease. This artist, Celine Balsi, is someone that I came across, and I'm completely in love with her work. Her work is created through growing mold, fungi, and bacteria on her panels. And what beauty that they have. And that's all that they are. So talk about chance operations. So here's another piece of hers. She is a scientist and an artist. Okay, so then I created this piece called Petri Dishes. It's the first time that I decided I was going to create an installation through drawing materials only. So these are a bunch of different panels, and I would just start drawing on them, playing around with sort of disease and things that could grow across their surface. And then I wanted it to be in my style of creating mass quantities of something and showing it as a group. This was another version. It has about 100 pieces at this point in time. To be completely honest with you, the drawing on the panels got to be boring to me. It's very different than me printing on them. So it's kind of, I had great ideas that this was going to become much larger, and I don't know that it ever will. So here's detail. I was really playing around, pushing my boundaries with the color in this piece, and just usually choosing colors I just hated. So I'd have to respond to it. Okay, so this is a collaboration that I have with a dancer. She's a colleague of mine, Megan McKinley. She had seen the work that I had been creating and really wanted to use it to inspire a dance piece. She provided me with a song that she thought was, a couple songs that were related to what I was doing, and then worked with her students with both my artwork and the music to create these different compositions. And I was really fascinated because they were using the body as a drawing tool. And I had not thought about that yet. So what she did was she layered a bunch of different images that I gave her. I probably gave her 100 different images. She layered them all in video with also some dance moves. And the pieces were both projected behind dancers, as well as, in this case, there were two different pieces that we did. This one, there was the layers of fabric that the video was projected onto. The dancers danced through the piece, and then this piece was projected on the wall. And I was trying to find a still or a little short clip of the video right before this, and I couldn't find one, but here's some stills. This was another wonderful experience working with an artist, you know, the completely different media. And I hadn't thought about the human body as a drilling tool, and I love that idea. Okay, so then the pandemic happened, and I started just printing mass quantities of these different prints and bringing them to my studio at home so I could play with collage. Here's the mess that I have. And I just start cutting them up into different sections and then play around with them on the canvases. So this is the first piece that I did, a very small version of it. And then the goal in normal Marilee style is to create a bunch, to create this large installation. And here's just some in my studio at home. And this is where I've gotten to this. So it's only 5 feet by 5 feet. It's not really that large. But I do want to continue to have this piece grow so it's much larger as well. And again, every time I've shown it, I've only shown it a few times, but I like to play around with the way I arrange it in a different way. Okay, so then I started doing a few of these larger pieces, definitely inspired by the pandemic and disease, sort of blowing up and metastasizing. And then to get to the very last thing, very quickly, I was invited to be in a portfolio on marine bioinvaders, which was really exciting to me because I had wanted to use the ocean in my work and I hadn't figured out the connection yet. But this was perfect connection because when I started researching them, I came across these amazing images. And this is so I'm probably going to not say it quite correctly, Cribillenia mutabis, which is a brontozoan. And I really wanted to explore this particular work. So I was put in contact with 2 scientists. One was Tom Trott, and the other one is Matt Dick. And they have been amazingly generous with their time and with their photos. I have probably 200 photos from them of these different creatures at different scales. So this is a whole colony. Okay, here's some close-up of the individual zooids. So like that's one. Here they are on eelgrass. They're tiny, tiny. And I was amazed when I saw this photo and I was like, oh my gosh, they are so small. They can tolerate a wide variety of temperatures and can settle on a wide variety of surfaces, from eelgrass to algae, plastic, boat bottoms. So they've been highly invasive. They were first discovered 5 decades ago in the Northwest Pacific, and then they were discovered in the Northeast Atlantic between 2008 and 13, and the Northwest Atlantic in 2018. Tom is in Maine and Matt is in Japan. So I started exploring around with how I could use these images, playing with different ways to try to get them to work in the print process. And that's a relief version of the last one. And this is what I ended up deciding to going with for the portfolio exchange. And this is all within the last probably, I don't know, 3 or 4 months. And then I made this piece, which is a new installation. I made it quickly because it's screen printing. It's 8 foot by 12 foot, so it's quite massive and you can't see the scale there, but here's a close-up. And here is a super quick little video of me installing it. Did you scale? This was just me playing around with installing it in the studio at school. And I hope to make it, of course, much larger. And I also wanted to make it so it can grow. I was kind of limited to the space because of this wall I was putting it on, but I certainly can see it growing across a much larger surface. And that is all.
Excellent. That was wonderful. Thank you so much. It was great to go all the way back, to like the rain work and see it come all the way through. So thank you for that. It's really interesting to see how an artist's process grows over time. To all of you watching, please feel free to put your questions into the Q&A, and I'll read those off. But while people are thinking up questions and typing them out, I have some that were sent to me earlier today, and then also some of my own. So one that was sent to me earlier today was just, how did you get into print in the first place? Like, what drew you to print in the first place? And then what also just drew you to art making in the first place?
Yeah, so whenever I was a little kid, I would always sort of go in my room and just draw. And it was sort of my escape from things that I didn't like. And so it's always been something that's really important to me way back then. I tried to explore other avenues because my parents didn't want me to be an artist. I actually was a hairstylist because my mom was a hairstylist. And I tried to make art sculptures out of hair, and I learned very quickly that that wasn't very popular. But so that was how I started. Printmaking, I took a print class, and what I noticed right off the bat was community. So printmaking is always super communal. You have to use a shared space. And at my school, it was just like this little family in the print shop. And I loved that. And I wanted to be a part of that. So that was certainly a draw to it. And I also really love complicated things. If it's too easy, like if it's too straightforward, like I'm just going to directly draw it, let's say, then it loses my interest really quick. I have some attention deficit disorder, so that might be part of that. But I can, I can do great hyper focus when I start working. So I need something to be more complicated as far as more processes involved to keep my attention span focused. And I also think that the time that is involved helps me think and sort of work things out. And that's just how my brain works. So those are some of the reasons. But the big draw was the community.
Yeah, that makes sense. As a fellow printmaker, I can totally vouch for the love of community within a shop. And yeah, it's one of the things that drew me to it as well. So I understand that. When I was listening to you talk about your process of printing, I started to wonder, of course, print has a history of making editions within multiples, but it doesn't seem like you are making editions. Am I accurate about that?
Yeah, I don't like to make editions. And I honestly will only do it if I have to, like for a portfolio. And I will often not agree to do those because I just don't like to do it. It doesn't hold my attention. I make the image and I see it and then I want to move on, or I want to use it in different ways. And that's really what draws me to the print, is its ability to create multiples and the sort of module aspect of it. And I can draw this thing. I mean, I usually don't even draw on a piece of paper. I just start drawing on a plate if I have something that I want to draw. And then I can use it in a bunch of different ways. And that's always been my way of working from the beginning. And really, honestly, when I have done editions of larger things, I usually will hire a student and they have to figure out how I made the piece and create some sort of map. And we'll talk about, what I'll first let them try to figure it out. And then I'll try to help them if they're stumped. And sometimes I don't remember what I did either. But yeah, so that's normally how I do that, because I just don't like to do it.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we have somebody asking, how do you go about choosing your materials for a project?
Good question. So it just depends. Often, so for an installation, I tend to get inspired by certain materials to make the work. And usually the way I get inspiration in that sense is I'll just come across something. And it's usually not when I'm expecting it to happen, where I'm just like out somewhere that I don't normally go, and I run across some sort of material that, and then all of a sudden all these ideas will come to me. So I often find the materials that way. But yeah, that's not really a very exciting answer.
No, it makes sense though. It's an honest answer, and that's important.
Yeah, and
Um,
how will it work in the space, and will it
yeah.
hold up too? And also something I think about that's very practical is it easy to ship? I've been doing these things with the wood, and it's like they're kind of horrible to ship. So that's when I was excited to do the piece with the film, because I can roll up a whole installation in a tube and ship that. So things like that, but usually that doesn't stop me because I often go back to things like wood.
Yeah. With your installation work, when you were driven to start doing installation, or I guess you mentioned that you were started to do installation back when you were working with your MFA, right? So, and then that has kind of started to carry you through. What is your vision for future work regarding installation?
Mhm. I'm going on sabbatical next year for the whole year, which is very exciting. I've never actually had a sabbatical, even though I've been teaching for extremely long time. So that's super exciting, and I will have all that concentrated time. So my goal is to make a larger installation than the growth patterns piece with etching. So, I mean, it probably won't, I shouldn't say larger than that piece in the year, but as large as I can. So that's the plan.
Cool. Do you have imagery that you're thinking about for that right now, or you're going to wait till sabbatical to start to tackle that issue?
I At this point in time, I think I'm going to work with the marine bio innovators still. Matthew Dick has given me, he's told me that he can, he shared a bunch of papers with me of a bunch of different rhinozoids that he's been researching. So I have access to that. And it kind of depends on my sabbatical. One sabbatical that I'm applying to is in San Francisco. And I've been talking to the people at the Smithsonian there. And I'm going to work with a researcher there and collaborate if I end up going there. So different plans, kind of depending on where I end up going or what I end up doing.
Cool. Yeah. Well, I'm excited to see it, whatever it is. You spoke at one point about choosing colors that you didn't like in order to challenge yourself. Can you speak more about that and that decision and how it came to you? And is that something that has changed how you work and how you think about your work?
So I think it's essential as an artist to do things that make you feel uncomfortable, so that because if you're in a place of comfort all the time in your work, I don't think that it can grow. So I like to always set up situations that cause me to be uncomfortable in creating. And my work tends to, like, natural colors that I choose tend to be quiet. So I've always been inspired by New Mexico, the desert, and I often choose colors that are very earth tone. So in order to kind of step outside of that and really explore other colors, I've done a number of things. One being, I'll just go into the print shop and take random inks that students left. And I won't even look at them, and I'll just grab a certain number of them, and I have to use those and respond. So setting up something like that where I don't like something, and then how do you deal with it? So setting up a problem that I have to solve in the work is really important to me. And I do that often with color too. So I'll choose a color that I think is just horrendous, like fluorescent pink. and put that down, and then, okay, deal with it, and see what happens. So that's something that I think is important. And I might do the same thing with a mark or something like that as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's really important to always push ourselves out of a comfort zone, create problems and then figure out how to solve those problems. That's
Right.
where new and exciting things come from, is taking chances, taking risks. Sometimes it fails and well, then you move on. So one final question here that also came in earlier, and it may be going back in the memory bank one, which is, what is your favorite artwork that you've ever made and what makes it your favorite?
We were talking about that the other day, or yesterday, I guess. So well, I think that my favorite artwork at this point in time is probably the growth patterns piece. Just because, well, I just love the scale of that piece, and all the individual pieces in it, and how it grows and takes over, and also how I can change it up every time that I install it. So I'd say that my favorite pieces would be installations that I've created. And then of them, that would be my favorite. And also just, I put such a long time into that piece. So it's definitely a labor of love, and kept coming back to it. But that first piece that I showed of the rain is definitely another favorite for sure.
Mhm. Yeah, that's great. Well, that kind of wraps it up for us for this evening. Thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your work with us tonight, as well as in the gallery. I can tell you, as somebody who goes into the gallery every day, it's just incredibly enjoyable. I find something new in every little one of the pieces of the installation every day to enjoy. For all of you watching, if you haven't been to Morlan to check out the show, Flux is up until February 25th. We're open Monday through Friday, noon to 5, or by appointment. So please come on in and check it out. And Marilee, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. And everyone, have a wonderful evening. Good night.
Thank you.